Have you ever listened in to a conversation in Japanese and thought, why does this sound so different from English? It's not just the words, it's the way that the conversation flows. Sometimes people don't say the subject. Sometimes they don't answer directly. Sometimes there are pauses where nobody says anything, and somehow everyone still understands each other. When I first started learning Japanese, I thought that conversations felt mysterious, but over time, I realized that there was actually a hidden logic behind all of it. And once I understood that logic, Japanese conversation suddenly became much easier to follow. So in this video, I would like to show you how Japanese conversations actually work. One of the biggest differences between English and Japanese is this. Japanese doesn't always say everything out loud. Imagine somebody ask, "Tabeta." Literally, it just means ate. There's no subject, no object, no explanation. Yet in the correct situation, everyone knows exactly what's being asked. Did you eat lunch? Did you eat dinner? Did you eat already? It all depends on the context. At first, this feels confusing, but after a while, you realize that Japanese isn't trying to give you every single piece of information. It assumes that both people are already sharing the same situation. And because of this, conversations often become shorter, smoother, and more natural. This leads to what I think is one of the most important ideas in Japanese. Context is everything. In English, we often rely on words to make our meaning clear. However, in Japanese, people often rely on the situation instead. For example, mo iku literally means already go, but depending on where you are right now, it could also mean are you leaving now? Shall we go? Time to head off? The sentence itself hasn't changed. The context gives it meaning. That's why Japanese learners sometimes feel lost. They are trying to understand every individual word, when the real answer is often found in what's happening in the conversation. One more thing that you will quickly notice is that Japanese often sounds less direct than English. Imagine someone invites you somewhere. In English, you may simply say, "Sorry, I can't." However, in Japanese, you might hear this instead, "chotto" or "難しいですね," which literally means that's a little bit difficult. These expressions often communicate the same idea, but in a gentler way. The goal isn't to avoid giving an answer, it's often to avoid making the other party feel uncomfortable. That is why Japanese conversations can sometimes sound indirect. They are trying to protect the relationship, not just exchange information. One thing that surprised me when I first began listening to real Japanese conversations was how often people responded while somebody else was still talking. You might hear things like, "Hi," "そうですね," "なるほど," At first, I thought that they were interrupting each other, but this usually isn't the case. These are called aizuchi, short responses that show that you are listening. They are not meant to take over the conversation. They are simply small signals that say, "I'm following," "I understand," "Please continue." In English, we often wait for the other person to finish before responding. However, in Japanese, showing that you are actively listening is an important part of the conversation itself. It's one of those little things that makes Japanese conversations feel so interactive, even when only one person is doing most of the talking. One more thing that you probably notice is that Japanese really sounds very absolute. Instead of saying, "this is true," people often say, "to omoimasu," which means "I think." Instead of saying, "this will happen," you might instead hear "kamoshirenai," which means maybe, or "kana," which means "I wonder." These expressions soften what you are saying. Instead of sounding overly certain, they leave room for the other person's opinion. This doesn't mean that people are unsure of themselves. It's simply a conversational style that often values humility and openness over sounding completely certain. Once you begin to notice these expressions, you hear them everywhere. Here's one thing that surprised me even more. In Japan, silence doesn't always feel uncomfortable. In many cultures, if there's a pause in the conversation, people often feel the need to fill it. But in Japanese conversations, quiet moments are often completely natural. Sometimes people are thinking, sometimes they are simply listening, sometimes they are just enjoying the moment. Not every pause has to be filled with words. I think that's one of the reasons why Japanese conversations often feel calmer. People are not constantly rushing to speak. They are comfortable giving each other a bit of space. And honestly, I think there's something quite peaceful about this. If I had to choose one idea that explains Japanese conversations, it is probably this: 空気を読む, which literally means to read the air, but it really means paying attention to the situation around you. Not just the words that someone says, but also their tone of voice, their facial expression, their body language, the timing, and the mood of the room. Sometimes, being able to understand what someone doesn't say is just as important as understanding what they do say. That is why Japanese conversations can feel subtle. Communication isn't only happening through words, it's happening through the atmosphere as well. Once I understood this idea, so many things about Japanese conversations began to make sense suddenly. After learning Japanese for several years, I eventually realized something. Japanese conversations are not difficult because there are too many grammar rules. They are different because they are built around a different goal. In English, conversations often focus on making your message as clear as possible. However, in Japanese, conversations often focus on helping both people feel comfortable. That is why people soften their opinions. That is why they don't always say everything directly. That is why context matters so much. And that is why listening is just as important as speaking. Once I stopped expecting Japanese conversations to work like English, everything began to make a lot more sense. I wasn't learning a completely different way of speaking. I was learning a different way of communicating. So if you are learning Japanese, here's the biggest piece of advice that I would give you. Don't try to translate every sentence word for word. Instead, start paying attention to how conversations actually flow. Listen to podcasts, watch interviews, watch Japanese YouTubers. Notice how often people say things like "so desu ne," "naruhodo," "chotto." Notice how often subjects disappear. Notice the pauses. Notice the soft expressions. The more you observe real conversations, the more natural Japanese starts to feel. And one day, you realize that you are no longer translating every sentence in your head. You are simply understanding it. When I first started learning Japanese, conversations felt very confusing. I kept wondering why people spoke this way, why they left words out, why they sounded indirect, why nobody seemed to answer questions directly. But now, I think that's one of the things that I appreciate most about the language. Japanese conversations remind me that communication isn't only about exchanging information, it's also about listening, showing consideration, reading the room, and making the other person feel comfortable. Once you understand that, Japanese conversations stop feeling mysterious. They start feeling beautifully human. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have ever noticed something interesting about Japanese conversations yourself, you can also share about this in the comments below. See you in the next video.